Hi, Kurt. I'm Scott Weiland. I sing for a band sometimes called STP. Let's be friends. Can't we all just get along? Hi.
Today we're talking about Scott Weiland, the lead singer of Stone Temple Pilots. Now, Scott Weiland was a very successful musician, won multiple awards, sold millions of albums, made millions of dollars. But however, if you were to lift the hood of all that success, you would see a very tragic life. A tragic life full of drug addiction, abuse, and multiple arrests. Now, of course, in this video, we're going to be talking about some pretty heavy stuff. But if you're on board, let's go. Now, Scott Weiland was born in San Jose, just like yours truly. He was born as Scott Richard Klein. Now, around the time Scott turned 2, his parents would get a divorce, and his mom would end up getting remarried. Shortly after his mom remarried, his stepdad, David Weiland, adopted him, giving him the last name Weiland. Around the time he was 5 years old, he would move from San Jose, California, out to Ohio. Now, in Scott Weiland's book, Not Dead, Not For Sale, he brings up a moment when he was in Ohio. He was 12 years old and he would go to school on a bus. On this bus, there was an older kid, a senior in high school, he describes him as a big, muscular kid. And this kid invited Scott Weiland over to his house. What happens next is truly disgusting and pretty devastating for a child. This kid ends up sexually abusing Weiland. Now, Weiland was told by this older kid to not say anything or he's going to have a lot of problems. So Weiland ended up suppressing and bottling up that issue until he was an adult. And it was during rehab when it actually resurfaced. Now, Scott Weiland would end up moving back to California. Around the time he was still in his teens, he was still going to high school, and they would move to Huntington Beach. Now, right now, I'm in Huntington Beach, California, and I'm across the street from where Scott Weiland would go to school and graduate. It's Edison High School, apparently home of the Chargers. Now, Scott Weiland was actually known as a pretty good student. He was on the football team. He was in the choir. It's probably where he got a lot of his chops. And yeah, he was very liked in school too. He was very charming, charismatic, and pretty popular. It's kind of around the end of his school year where he joined a band. They would play, actually, him and a couple of cool cats from the same school. They would go out and play around Huntington Beach. This is where he kind of learned that he was a natural. He was kind of a natural at being a frontman. He was known to be very charismatic from the very beginning, and it really clicked. Our next stop is right here in Long Beach, California, and right here is Fender's Ballroom. This is where Scott Weiland would go see Black Flag in 1985. This is also where he would meet Robert DeLeo, which would become the bass player for Stone Temple Pilots. Now, he met him here at the Black Flag concert by having a conversation. The conversation went something like they started talking about their love life. And throughout this conversation, they somehow came to the conclusion that they were actually both dating the same girl. And you would think that at this time that a big fight would happen. Somebody would stand up and be like, bro, that's my girl. However, what did happen was that they actually bonded over it. They actually thought it was quite hilarious, the fact that they were dating the same girl. Obviously, they both broke up with her sometime around 1988, 1989. They would move to San Diego, and they would actually end up renting the same apartment that their girlfriend rented at one time. And I thought that was pretty funny. After graduating from Edison High School over in Huntington Beach, Scott Weiland would go to Costa Mesa's OCC, which is Orange Coastal College. And it was around this time that he would start a band that was called Swing. Now, I never heard Swing, but there were several accounts online that would say that Swing sounded somewhat like Red Hot Chili Peppers. Now, that kind of pans out because around the late 80s, early 90s is right around the time that the Red Hot Chili Peppers actually started getting some fame. Now, Swing would predate STP, Stone Temple Pilots, and it was a completely different band. It was different people within the band too, and they would proceed to kind of play around LA and around Orange County. They were getting some popularity. By the time 1989 rolled around, Swing would perform mostly in San Diego, developing an audience. They figured, let's just stay in one town and we'll build an audience, and from there kind of move up. Well, one of the members from Swing actually left the band, and this is where Robert DeLeo suggested his brother join the band. His brother was a guitar player, but he was also a very successful businessman, so there was a lot of kind of talking him into joining the band. His older brother is Dean DeLeo, will soon become the guitar player for STP. At the time, they were still called Swing, and Dean DeLeo was not fond of that name. He actually told him, I will join your band, but I'm not joining a band named Swing. And this was around the time they would become Mighty Joe Young. Now, by the time the band became Mighty Joe Young, they pretty much were fully formed. This was actually what would become STP in the future. You had Scott Weiland, Dean DeLeo, Robert DeLeo, and Eric Kretz on drums. Surprised that Scott Weiland and the boys would eventually find themselves back here in Los Angeles County, the mecca of the entertainment industry. Now, the band under Mighty Joe Young has found a pretty good following in San Diego, but they landed their first big gig right here. And right now, I'm standing right by Whiskey A Go-Go in West Hollywood. Now, this is circa 1991, 1992, and Mighty Joe Young would find themselves opening for Henry Rollins. Now, of course, this would be a big deal for the band because Henry Rollins was pretty popular in the early 90s. Around this time, another big deal was going on with the band, and we're gonna head over to that spot right now and talk about it. In 1992, Mighty Joe Young would sign a record deal with Atlantic Records. It was while they were recording for their first album, Core, that they got a call from their lawyer. And their lawyer called them to tell them that the name Mighty Joe Young has already been taken. They couldn't legally take Mighty Joe Young as a band name. So they got together and figured out a new name. They all agreed that they really liked the old bumper stickers STP. So they came up with the name Stone Temple Pilots. So they were legally able to use the initials STP. Now their album Core came out in 1992. I believe it was September 1992. And it was not well received by critics. It was panned. It was panned for being wannabe grunge. It was panned for being wannabe Pearl Jam. Despite the fact that it was panned so hard by the critics, the album would go on to see commercial success. By the time 1993 rolled around, the album has sold over millions of copies and would go platinum. Now before it actually went platinum, this is where we're going to get into Scott Weiland's more darker side. 1993, 2 months before the album Core goes platinum, Scott Weiland, for the first time, tries heroin. Fast forward to 1995. Scott Weiland was married to his first wife, Janina. It's also around this time when Scott Weiland would be caught in Pasadena, California with possession of cocaine, crack, and heroin. Now he got in a lot of trouble for this. He escaped jail time, but he was on probation and he was forced to go to rehab. By the time he was arrested, STP would have 2 highly successful studio albums under their belt, Core and 1994's Purple. Now, it was because of this, his first wife, Janina, didn't really want anything to do with him at this point. Really wanted just him to not come home, so she would not allow Scott Weiland to come home. This is where we need to go to another spot and continue the story. Let's go. Weiland was sentenced to a 1-year probation, and on top of that, he had to go to rehab. This was supposed to be the time he's supposed to recover. However, right now I'm at a hotel called Chateau. And this is where Weiland would go after his wife kicked him out. Now you would think, okay, he's probably gonna get a little better. Well, when he got here, he had a next door neighbor. His next door neighbor was none other than Courtney Love. Now mind you, this is supposed to be the time Weiland is supposed to get away and go to rehab and get off the drugs. But according to Courtney Love, they did nothing but lock themselves in a room, and in her words, all they would do is shoot drugs. Needless to say, Weiland would not get away from his drug addiction hanging out with Courtney Love. And in return, they had to cancel quite a few concerts. Now, behind closed doors, the DeLeo brothers around 1995 were actually considering replacing Scott Weiland. And it was an ongoing struggle for the rest of the band because of Scott Weiland's problems. Now, obviously, they would go on to record quite a few other albums afterwards. In fact, they would go on to recording Tiny Music in 1996. Unfortunately, Weiland did not learn a lesson. In 1998, Weiland was again arrested on drug possession in New York City, which resulted in them canceling more concert dates. It was around this time that Weiland pleaded guilty for heroin possession. In July of 1999, Weiland would overdose on heroin. He was then sentenced to 1 year in prison for violating his probation. Just before the release of Stone Temple Pilots' 4th album, Number 4, Weiland would enter a treatment center. Scott Weiland, and really the whole band, would continue struggling with his drug addiction. By the time 2003 rolls around, the DeLeo brothers have had it. They are tired of his tardiness to shows, oftentimes showing up hours late to gigs, and oftentimes having to cancel shows due to his drug issues. So the band mutually decided to break up. At this point, I must mention that Scott Weiland was also in and out of different projects throughout his music career, while he was with Stone Temple Pilots and while he was broken up from STP. But the most notable side project that he had was Velvet Revolver. Velvet Revolver was kind of a super group. You had Stone Temple Pilots vocals, Weiland, and you had the rest of the band, which was from Guns N' Roses, including Slash, one of my favorite guitar players. Velvet Revolver would see some commercial success. They sold quite a few albums, and that makes sense. There was a lot of good talent in the band. And they came out with 2 studio albums. But unfortunately for Velvet Revolver, that came to an abrupt end when Scott Weiland would rejoin STP. By 2008, STP was back out on the road. So right now I'm in Sherman Oaks, and this is a neighborhood within Los Angeles, an upper scale neighborhood. And right behind me is one of Scott Weiland's houses. Now Scott Weiland only lived here for about a year. He lived with his second wife, Mary. Now his second wife, Mary, is the woman that he would have 2 kids with. And they lived here at this house from 2007 to 2008. Now in 2001, Weiland was diagnosed bipolar. And this was around the time he was at a show in Vegas with his second wife, Mary. And before this show, he got physically abusive with Mary. They got into a big altercation, fight back and forth, yelling match, and he would end up throwing her against the wall. Cops were called on him, and he was sentenced to jail time. Now, it wasn't very long. However, it did go onto his record. Fast forwarding to 2007, this is where Scott Weiland and Mary Weiland would live. And it was said, now there's multiple stories out there, but it was said this is where they got into a big fight, and Mary took Weiland's wardrobe, put it out on the front yard, and caught it on fire. Now cops were called. It was a big problem, and a lot of people think that that's the reason why they only lived at this house for 1 year. Now it's a nice looking house, however there is a lot of shrubbery in front of it. So in 2007, Weiland would get a divorce with his second wife, and he would move to another house, still in Sherman Oaks. And it was around this time in 2008 when Weiland would get into trouble with the law again. He was driving his car under the influence and crashed it. Now, he had several DUIs in the past, and this was just another added DUI to his ever-growing issues. Now, right behind me is the house that Scott Weiland would move into after he left the prior house. Now this is where he would marry his third wife, Jamie. They actually had their wedding right here at this house. They got married in 2013, right in the backyard. Scott Weiland was living at this house when they came out with their last studio album in 2010, simply titled Stone Temple Pilots. It was around this time when Stone Temple Pilots basically had it with Scott Weiland showing up late, his abusive behavior, his drug abuse. And by 2013, Stone Temple Pilots would fire Scott Weiland. From here on out, Stone Temple Pilots would go on their own, and Weiland would also go on his own. He had other projects that he would get involved with. Let's talk about that next. Shortly after Scott Weiland was fired from STP in 2013, he would go on to another band. It was called Scott Weiland and the Wildabouts. And it was a little before this time where Scott Weiland was starting to visibly look sick. He just wasn't performing well on stage at the end of STP. He physically looked so thin and sickly. And that continued into this band as well. Scott Weiland and the Wildabouts would record one studio album. And with that studio album, they would go on tour. While they were on tour in Bloomington, Minnesota, Scott Weiland ended up overdosing. On December 3rd, 2015, Weiland was found on the tour bus dead. The autopsy found alcohol and multiple drugs in his system. Right now, I'm at the Forever Hollywood Cemetery. Now, don't come to the Forever Hollywood Cemetery thinking that you're gonna find Scott Weiland's grave, because he was cremated and his urn was given to family members. And even though he doesn't have a grave here, here's some photos of his urn. Weiland was known for using a bullhorn on stage, and this urn is just perfect. Now, if you ask me, I think that's the perfect way to memorialize somebody. Take something that he was known for and something he loved and use it as something to remember him by. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this video took a very, very long time. If you made it this far, I would appreciate it if you gave me a thumbs up and possibly share my video. I would highly appreciate that. And also, if you would like to watch more videos from me, right over here, I did a video of Dick Dale about 2 weeks ago. As of the recording of this video, go check that video out over there. I'll see you over there, guys. Take care. Rest in peace, Scott Weiland. You will forever be missed.